Welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTech Think Tank webinar series on Reduce Risk and Manage Costs, Cybersecurity Protection for K12 Schools. If you have any questions now or during today's presentation, please type them into the chat box or questions pane in the Zoom control panel. Now, I would like to pass the platform to Dr. Carl Horvath, President and CEO at Campus Consortium Foundation.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for attending today. This is the EdTech Think Tank webinar series sponsored by Campus Consortium Foundation, and we have special guests today, Brett Luttrell and Eric Conklin from two school districts to talk about security and K12. First, I want to give a shout out to some of our attendees today. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. We have Pryor Public Schools. So Candace, thanks for joining us. Wayne Westland Community School District is here. And we have Gilbert Community Schools. Thanks, Jason, for joining. Marshall Public Schools, Pryor Public Schools, Kernville Union Elementary, and we also have Wolf Creek Online High School. We also have Cabell County Family Resource Network joining us, and Estancia Municipal School District. So great variety of different K-12 leaders in school districts. We have technology operations managers, director of IT, and some superintendents. So I appreciate, Stacy, you joining us also from Florida. So without further ado, let's get moving on our presentation today. And first, I would like to tell you just a little bit about Campus Consortium Foundation. This is our topic. We're going to talk about cybersecurity. It's not a deep technical dive today, but it will skim the surface, and we will talk about items that apply not just to IT folk, but everybody within K-12 school districts. Campus Consortium Foundation has been around since 2003. We have done a lot of work with higher education, and more recently have expanded our K-12 support. And since 2020, when the pandemic hit, we really have increased our membership of K-12 school districts across the country, and we're happy to support all of education. These are some of the benefits that we offer if you join. In addition to sharing and peer collaboration, access to our portal, webinars, advising, and other programs and services, we would love you to reach out to us or go visit our website at campusconsortium.org or campusconsortiumfoundation.org. And special thanks to our guest school districts. We have Alum Rock's Union School District and Brookfield Public Schools that allowed their technology leaders to join us and speak with you today. This is a poll question. There'll be about 5 poll questions today. We would appreciate it if you could answer this very quickly in 30 seconds as we move through the presentation. This is important because we take that information and can discuss it. We will also make sure that we get the deck out to you along with the statistics from other school districts so you can compare yours to other institutions. Every response is anonymous, so we will not know where these responses come from. So the first poll question is, does your district employ a full-time chief information security officer? Yes, no, or outsourced? So I'm going to give you a brief overview on technology and security today, and then we're going to get right into our guest speakers. This will be very quick, but I think sometimes it helps to orient us on our topic. Well, technology is essential. Everybody knows this, from social to business to work. It affects every aspect of our lives. And every educational institution now, especially since the pandemic, I mean, it was coming before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, the reliance on technology has increased. because if something like that happens again, we have to make sure our institutions can move forward and continue supporting our students. So, and our teachers to teach the students. So this is important for us to have a technology plan in all our school districts across the country. And there are impacts to everything that everybody does. It's not just about technology. And if you look at the news and read publications, the digital world is changing rapidly. Your cybersecurity needs you to keep up. We all hear about best practices in cybersecurity, but what does that mean for us? We know that we're supposed to have strong passwords as individuals or as consumers, or we log into our health website to email our doctor, or we log on to Amazon to make a purchase, and any other variety of best practices, like our bank, our financial institutions ask us to have strong passwords. But what's that mean for the school district? It's impacting all our students, teachers, and staff day to day. And there is a whole nother level of protection and cautions that we must really implement to lower everyone's risk. So here's an article, and we'll send this deck out to everybody so you can access this article about cybersecurity. This is a survey of school district administrators from across the country. Many need to be more educated on the importance of cybersecurity, best practices, and making sure that everyone is protected. Some do not even have any security platform or plan, and really need to have something. And it doesn't cost a lot of money for you to have a cybersecurity plan at your institution. We can help with that with Campus Consortium Foundation for no cost to get you started. But there are many vendors that offer a wide variety of support too, that we can help you with. Some have a high level of confidence in the privacy and security of the data in their cloud apps. And so hopefully they've done the due diligence before they get an app that they have students and teachers use to make sure of the security, compliance, and regulations in terms of state and federal, but also in terms of IT security best practices. So we'll send this to you. You can read the entire article. Here's, of course, I think most school districts know about the challenges of finances and compliance, and now remote work is becoming an issue for every organization, every business, every nonprofit is dealing with some level of remote work. And so resources have to be there. Another couple articles, this one from AP News at the top, the other one from govtech.com, which really are good articles about the essentials in regard to each of these reports and how they affect the K12 school district across the country. There's a lot of best practices and basic ideas that are helpful in implementing a good security plan. And of course, we know there is a security gap, not just with K12, but also with higher education and many nonprofits, because the resources, the finances are just not there to have complete protection. And it's essential to have at least the basics in your institution to lower your risk, to get better rates on cyber insurance, or to get cyber insurance to begin with in case something happens. Also, many districts have audits, and maybe external auditors or state or local auditors in their region that have to come in and make sure, in addition to the finances being okay for the district, that the controls are in place for protecting critical data and protecting the identities and the data of students, faculty, and staff. There's reports out there that are available, and you can visit the K12 Cybersecurity Incident Map, which is at the Resource Center. There's a link in this PowerPoint, and we will send this out to you so you can check on across the country, maybe in your region, what the cybersecurity statistics look like, and perhaps what protections you need to prioritize, because it will give you, here's a list on the right from 2020: denial of service, phishing, ransomware. So you can customize your IT security plan based on the activity that's happening out there. So filling these security gaps, another solution is to talk with managed service providers. There's more and more available for not just higher education, but K-12 school districts who never thought they could afford to outsource some of the functions that are essential to the district, such as 24/7 monitoring. Very important to do that. We can't keep your IT director or chief technical officer working 24/7, especially when the staff is smaller and the district is big. And something can happen at 2 a.m. or on the weekend when no one may be watching. So it's important to see what's available for K-12 because that will protect your network, it'll protect your data, and someone will be monitoring your district 24/7 and alert you, or actually resolve the issue in case there's a problem. So again, more reports that you'll get in this PowerPoint deck. We've sourced a lot of information from government websites, state websites, and some of these organizations that are available for K-12 IT and K-12 security, such as the K-12 Security Information Exchange. These websites are not just for techies. They also address the concerns of superintendents, faculty, and other staff in your district. So there's something for everybody in these resources. I'm going to hit you with one more poll question before we jump into our presenters today. And this poll question is: identify your top IT security and compliance concerns, and you can select all that apply. So just kind of run through the list. Whatever you think is urgent or important for your district, please let us know. And we'll be glad to kind of let everybody know once we get the poll results up on the screen. So I am going to jump over to introducing our two panelists today. We have Brett Littrell, Chief Technical Officer from the Alumni Rocks Union School District. And we have Eric Conklin, the Director of Technology from Brookfield Public Schools. And today they will share what they do in their school districts to lower their risk, to protect their students, and to ensure they comply with regulation from the district, from the local government, from the state, and from the federal government. Here's the results of poll number 2. Interesting. Identify your top security compliance concerns. And so if we look at the numbers, look like most are evenly spaced between training, security monitoring, staff expertise, no process or procedure, but very high on protecting student, parent, teacher, staff data. That's huge. And again, there's only so much sometimes that an IT department can do, and there are more and more services out there with managed service providers that can help in this area and supplement your existing IT team to make sure they pick up the protection for all the data and the access for the systems of your community. Okay, one more poll question. Thank you for participating. That was great information. And this poll question says, has your district experienced any of the following cybersecurity threats? And again, select all that apply: phishing, ransomware, unsecure Wi-Fi, denial of service attacks. This is when somebody bombards your website, for example, or an application, and it can't be used. Say a faculty member wants to teach a class of students with a certain app, but it's being attacked by an outside source of pings or overloading the website so it cannot be used. Outdated software systems, personal digital devices, data breach, and video conference disruption. We all know about Zoom bombing, I'm sure by now, where you can have a webinar and then before Zoom, the company, put in controls, people were jumping into other people's webinars and either taking over or interrupting it. So the instruction was not as effective as it could have been. Poll number 3, has your district experienced any of the following cybersecurity threats? Looks like number 1 is phishing scams, and looks like 2 and 3 is ransomware. Yeah, the phishing and ransomware, very big. Ransomware can stop your school district in their tracks, meaning they can just stop all the operations. In terms of IT, if you have face-to-face instruction with students, that's great, but a lot of times teachers are using PowerPoints or the internet for instruction, and sometimes ransomware can take over the network or stop the internet or stop access for the entire district, depending on how it's configured. But we'll hear more about this from our guest speakers. Ransomware is a big issue. All right, our first presenter today, Brett Luttrell. Brett Luttrell is the Chief Technology Officer of the Alum Rock Union School District and a senior level IT architect, strategist, and leader in network and security operations. He provides top and bottom line performance with continuous success and achieving his objectives for the district. And he develops cost-effective technology strategies. This is an important skill, as well as the technology expertise, because many educational institutions are nonprofit and don't operate the same as for-profit. So their funds and resources are definitely less. And often the people that work and support these educational institutions have to do more with less and be creative to help them not just survive, but thrive. And that's what Brett does for his district. His understanding of technologies. So he also brings innovative technology into the district and socializes that with teachers and students. And his credentials include Cisco ISC2, Microsoft A10, and Novell. And thank you so much, Brett, for joining us today. I'm going to hand this over to you, and please take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I guess we could go ahead and just start with the first topic we have here. This is one thing that I always like to address, because I always hate to see, this coming up, that this idea of a perimeter is dead or it's fading away from the network. And I believe this is just a marketing ploy. This is just people trying to get you to buy whatever they're selling you. The perimeter is actually, in my perspective, anything that the edge of anything that you can actually control. So as far as like they talk about the cloud, getting rid of the perimeter. You no longer have that perimeter with the cloud. Well, no, that's not exactly true, right? Because you build infrastructure in the cloud. Usually that infrastructure has a gateway in the cloud that you can control, or a load balancer that's sitting in front of all your infrastructure, and you can actually deal with like ACLs or any kind of limitations that you want to put on those services or detections. And so that really becomes your perimeter. It's not a classical perimeter like you normally have, but it is now your new perimeter. And so you really have to understand what your perimeters are and figure out, okay, where does my control end, so that I can at least do what I can do to apply control, at that point. So as I mentioned, for cloud, the network gateway, normally you have virtual network gateways in your cloud environment, or NAT gateways, or load balancers, or even sometimes firewalls that you can actually go in and you can actually build your parameter as far as what services you want to come into your infrastructure in the cloud. SaaS is a little bit different, right? I mean, these are applications that are sitting on on a different provider's network, but you still have the ability to control access to that. And that really kind of comes in if you're implementing like single sign-on to SaaS applications. At that point, you can't control what they're actually, getting access to or giving access to their application, but you can control at least what the user is able to access. And so if that user gets compromised, they don't necessarily compromise information into that service. And then, of course, on-prem is a classical, firewall. But one thing I think a lot of people miss is also access switches and Wi-Fi. And so it's not just, blocking people from the internet. It's actually blocking people from just plugging into your network, and it may not even be a malicious person. It may be someone who took their computer to Starbucks, got infected with a virus or some kind of backdoor Trojan. They come and plug into your network. And if you don't have some kind of access control, then they're possibly going to affect everything in your network. And then, we end up with these issues with ransomware, right? So you want to make sure you secure your perimeter. And this means that you actually have to go through and you actually have to look at your privileges for ACL services, for the cloud, for SaaS. There may be applications in SaaS, that have very sensitive information. If you have single sign-on implemented, then what you really want to do is maybe implement MFA for those applications that have sensitive data, but you don't want to make this unusable for most of the users. So maybe other applications that don't need that protection, don't have MFA. So it makes it easier. They still have to use a username and password, but at least you're giving some control as far as what's going to be accessible. And I would say single sign-on is one of those services that it's a win-win situation all around. For one thing, if you're using like SAML and OpenAuth, you never transfer credentials to any applications, even if you're using this internally. So if someone comes along and compromises an application internally, and this is a server that's sitting in your server farm, if you're using SSO to access that, at least you're mitigating the option of them stealing those credentials, because those credentials are actually never sent to that internal server. And so I would say anywhere you can apply single sign-on, not only does it make it easier for your users, it makes it more flexible to implement like multi-factor authentication, and it also protects, or at least reduces the scope of potential compromises when people do actually access services. And for the internal network, the typical one is like 802.1x, even on internal hardwired ports, on Wi-Fi. Make sure you implement 802.1x or some type of control. And if at all possible, get rid of pre-shared keys. There should be no networks with pre-shared keys. There is always that exception, right? There are some devices, that absolutely will not work without a pre-shared key. And so in those instances, your only option is to limit the scope, right? And so, at that point, as much as possible, just, implement pre-shared keys where they're needed, as far as Wi-Fi networks, and, leave it at that. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide. And then this part I wanted to kind of go over, because this is, it's my second in about 2.5 years here. And one of the first things I did was I came in and I wanted to build a strategic plan. And for me, it was a 3-year plan. And this is kind of giving the general direction of where we wanted to go, what we wanted to be in 3 years. And so, there's everything in there from, refreshing the network to implementing single sign-on to implementing multi-factor authentication and so on and so forth. And I think one of the most important things is actually having this. This is not something that's board approved. This is not something that has to be board approved. This is a CIOs or a CTOs or a director of IT's own roadmap on where they want to be in 3 years. And then, you can kind of build that out to actually coordinate, your tactical planning, which is more like 6 months out. So you can actually plan for deployments and figure out which ones you want to do first. And some of these things like coordinate with E-rate. If you have tech refreshes, if you get Category 2 funds, you can use a lot of that money to, from E-rate to actually buy switches or Wi-Fi and whatnot. So maybe, if you have a strategic plan and you know that in the next 3 to 5 years, you need to replace the switches and the Wi-Fi, well, maybe coordinate, which ones do you need to replace first? Is it switches? Because, those are going bad faster. So, do that and then see if you can hold off on the Wi-Fi until, the next E-rate refresh, so you can utilize that money as much as possible. Space out upgrades. When you're actually dealing with upgrades, you're not talking about just today. If you have a bond or something like that and you're like, hey, I can buy everything, that's not so great later on, right? Because, in 7 years, when you have to replace that, now you got this huge bill again. So I'm not saying, if you have the money, don't use it, but try and space those upgrades out if you can. And so what ends up happening is, if you start to, after 7 years, you end up having a small bill because you don't know what's going to happen in 7 years. Your budgets may be cut. There may be no bond money left. There may be no way for you to replace this stuff. And so, having that lower bill makes it a little easier to be able to upgrade later on, even if it's year over year. So if possible, familiarize yourself with restricted and time-sensitive money. And this may be on the education side. Talk to instructional services, talk to business, find out, what restricted monies there are, what's the requirements for them, and utilize those as much as possible before you actually go in and start hitting your general budget, right? Because you hit your general budget, then once you run out, if you need something and it doesn't fall under that restricted or time-sensitive money, then guess what? You don't get it. So, and this next thing is something that I found over my career, and I tell my guys, the one sure way to sink an IT ship is to make it unusable by users. And it's great to be able to implement super secure things, and implement security across the board. If users don't use it, guess what? Your security isn't worth anything. So when you implement security, make sure that it's usable. Make sure it's easy for the user to use. And in fact, the holy grail to me is you make security easier to use than not to use. And I always harp on this. Single sign-on is a great way to do that. Having someone log in once, even if they have to have multi-factor authentication, and then they access all their applications from single sign-on, that makes it so much easier for the user. Okay, and if you implement single sign-on first, you build that good rapport with the users, and then you're able to go back and say, hey, we want to secure this a little bit more. We're going to add multi-factor authentication. They're probably so happy that they have one place to go for all their logins. They don't have to type it in over and over again. It's not that big of a deal for them, right? So another thing that I found in my career is this idea that you can outsource your own responsibility. And I'm here to tell you, you can't. You can't go out and hire a security firm and expect them to, secure your stuff. And if they don't, well, it's not your problem. Guess what? You go out and hire a security firm and they come in and they miss something, and you get hit with ransomware. You fire that security firm. Guess what? You still got to clean up that ransomware. It's not like you fire the security firm, the ransomware goes away. So, when it really comes down to it, the buck stops here in the IT department at the school districts. Okay. So you have to make sure it's not a big deal to hire third parties, but understand you're still going to be responsible for that. It doesn't matter what it is. And the last thing is probably the hardest thing. And it's the longest thing to get actually implemented. And that's train your staff to integrate security, not just apply it as an afterthought or apply it as a reaction, but actually think about when they actually install something, how are they going to secure this? Actually ask questions like, hey, if I install this smart board and they get put on this network, they're going to have access to this. Do we want that? Those are the questions you want to hear, because that way, you know that moving forward, you're at least thinking about security before you actually implement this, and then you can actually work through that. So next slide. And this is another one I thought about just recently, and it kind of makes sense to me because I see this all the time. I've gone to different private companies, before I left the last school district I was at. And what I find across the board is IT is afraid to make, is afraid in general. Okay. They're afraid of a lot of things. And so, you have to really build in this mentality into your team where it's, they don't have to be afraid about making mistakes as long as they learn from them, right? And I'm not talking about just, really like stupid mistakes where they delete an entire database. I'm talking about, they're putting ACL in and they missed a line and it, disconnect people for five minutes or 30 minutes. Those are the kind of mistakes that, like, hey, at least they did something. And what I found in both IT and private sector and in public sector is people are so afraid to make mistakes, they never make any changes at all. And so you have systems that have never been changed in the last 10 years because they don't want to accidentally break something. And guess what? If you're not moving forward with technology, you're moving backwards. And so, that is a really big, thing you got to actually drill into your guys. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to shut down derelict systems. Now, I've seen this. I used to work for a load balancer company. We had 110 racks of gear, and these were full racks. We spent $100,000 a month on power. And, no one wanted to shut anything down because they didn't know whose it was, what it was, or anything like that. It may have been derelict there for 3 or 4 years, but no one wanted to shut anything down. So you got to be, you can't be afraid to actually shut down systems that you don't know about. Shut it down, wait to see if someone complains, after 6 months, pull it out of the rack, okay? If they still complain, if you hear a complaint a year later, put it back in the rack and boot it up and then document what that actually is, okay? Remove hardware, you take up space. Sometimes you take up, AC cooling in your server rooms, in your network closets. People don't know what that stuff is. After a certain point, they're just like, I don't know what it does. And so, it just makes everything more confusing. Makes it harder to do things. Don't be afraid to change processes. This is probably the most politically hard thing, right? No one likes to change what they're doing because they already know what they're doing, right? This is how they've always done it. Well, sometimes doing it that way is not the best way, right? But you also have to kind of fall into you have to make it better. There's no point in changing something just to change something. Change processes to make them better. And you actually have to not be afraid to actually do that. Another thing, don't be afraid to accept negative, feedback, especially when it's constructive, right? You have to grow. You can't think that you're you know everything, right? Accept that you don't know everything, okay? I've seen some people, thankfully not a huge amount, but some people that they'll just make up stuff, when you're talking to them, and it's like, whoa, you really don't know what you're talking about, do you? And so don't be afraid. It shows more about your character to say, I don't really know about that. Can you tell me about it? Than it does to just fake it, right? And this one I found being here, offer help when it's not even asked for. And this is something like, let's say you're talking to instructional services. Oh, we just got this new application, right? And it's a great application. We're going to put this out to everybody. Offer up, say, hey, can we get that on single sign-on? It's going to make everybody's life easier. Offer that help up because one, it makes you more secure, in the long run, but it also makes everything a lot easier for them, right? And who are they going to come to when something doesn't work? They're going to come to you. So, offer that help up beforehand. So, yeah. Next slide. And then, I just want to cover cybersecurity lessons learned that I've experienced throughout my career. You have to kind of understand that there's no one solution for everything, right? If you go to a vendor, like a Cisco or a Microsoft, and they have a solution for everything, but is it always the best solution? Is it the solution that's going to work for you? And so, don't fall into that mentality where, you kind of have to buy everything from one vendor. You have to find out what actually works for your district, what's going to work best for you. So mix and match, make sure you stick to the standard so you can intermingle these technologies as you need it, right? One other thing I found, and this is when I worked at a security company, was, we see a lot of supply chain attacks right now, and we probably will continue to see those. Guess what? Those aren't really mitigated by surveys. You send, your supplier a survey. Hey, do you comply with this? Unfortunately, I was one of the ones that actually had to respond to some of those surveys. And I have my CISSP, and there's actually a clause in there that if you're like dishonest, they can revoke it. And I always use that as my excuse to say, you know what, I can't answer this, because if I answer this, you're not going to get this deal. And so guess what they would do? They would go and give it to somebody else who would answer it, right? And so, you can't expect a survey or a compliance, to protect you from supply chain attacks. You still have to build mitigations in, when you implement a service, right? You can't just say, okay, this complies with all this, so we can put it out on the internet with, completely open. It's like, no, you still have to mitigate that. You still have to, do your due diligence. So another thing I found was, monitor and alert for indicators of compromise. Okay. And these, the probably the minimum you actually have to do is Active Directory. Make sure that you see what's going on with Active Directory. Make sure that anytime, the enterprise or global admins groups have someone added to it, you get alerted, or some, your whole team gets alerted. That's probably the very, very minimum you should have out there right now. There's lots of other indicators of compromise, and it's great to add those in, but you got to make sure you don't bury yourself either, right? Otherwise, you're just going to ignore it, okay? And this kind of comes into the next thing. Don't get buried with every public security alert out there. I get all these different things from CISA, InfraGard, data breach, and all these other services that they send you. Hey, this just happened, this just happened. Try and focus in on, what you guys have, what you have in your environment. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of looking at other ones, that's fine, but you need to focus on what you have in your network first, and then start looking at the other stuff if that interests you. But you really do need to keep on top of that, but you need to make sure, you don't get buried. And finally, NIST is a great source for anything to do with cybersecurity, as far as I'm concerned. The frameworks are awesome. They really do try and focus on a general good practice for security. And I'm not saying you need to completely comply with NIST frameworks or anything like that. What I'm saying is it's a great standard to go and actually, try and what's the word? It's a great standard to go and base your decisions on, right? So if you're going to go and implement, MFA, go to NIST. They actually have, articles on MFA, which ones are better, how you should implement it, and so on and so forth. Utilize NIST for all that stuff. It's free. It's out there. You can get a lot of really good information and build your security much better, if you can go through there and understand the general idea of, how they're actually want you to implement it. And that's it. Hopefully I didn't take too much time there, Carl. You're on mute.
Always got to do that once a day, whether you need to or not. But no, thank you so much for that, Brett. That was excellent overview. And I love how you pulled in a lot of your experience from the private sector and for-profits. And there are a lot of similarities in IT security among all organizations. Technology is technology, but there are unique attributes to education where we do have limited resources. And just to speak to what you said about trusting vendors and not laying it all in the vendor's lap to manage for you. I agree with that. I think the IT department leadership really needs to be able to understand at least the big picture of what's going on and keep tabs on what the vendors are doing in addition to their staff. But we have to be careful that leaders like you and Eric don't get burned out either, because then you're no good to the school district. So it's selecting, as you had mentioned, the right vendors and looking at the agreements and what they can offer. And so an example is like you wouldn't want to, and I mentioned this earlier or somewhere about 24/7 SOC, right? So it's almost like network monitoring. Like you don't want to do that 24/7, but you know about your network and you know about the IT security, and having somebody outsourced to do that 24/7 is good because they can alert you at 2 o'clock in the morning to let you know something happened and maybe even mitigate it with your permission. So yeah, I agree that you have to keep tabs on it. The other thing you said, which was very good, especially for nonprofits and education, is the money, the budgets. And you're right. You never know, especially in education, when the district is going to get funding pulled back, right? I mean, you can't count on grants. You can't count on the same budget every year. So you have to be very frugal but effective in how you manage your money. I love that comment by you. And it's not easy with IT, right? It's one of the biggest line items in the district's budget. So that was great. Thank you, Brett. Much appreciated. I just want to jump over to the next poll question. Identify cybersecurity best practices in your district and select all that apply. Update its cybersecurity plan, monitor current threats, social engineering, SOC. We just talked about that, Security Operations Center, endpoint protection and response. This is protecting your internal, say, computers and systems inside the district, third-party cybersecurity experts, state and federal cybersecurity compliance, and security awareness training. There's so much emphasis on training, but not a whole lot of people do training with their community. And so you don't have to overdo it. But if you give everyone in your community a sense of important cybersecurity topics and what to look for as far as best practices, then it really helps protect everybody. Also, I put the link to NIST, which Brett had mentioned in our chat. I am going to move over to Eric right now, and Eric is the Director of Technology at Brookfield Public Schools. And very quickly, just to look at this list here, the response was overwhelmingly state and federal cybersecurity compliance. Yes, that is important. And so if you can set up controls and monitoring with either your vendors or your team to make sure you're meeting those regulations, then that is definitely one of the first things you want to do, because you don't want to threaten any of your funding or get in trouble with the government. So good feedback there. Monitor current cybersecurity is also another one. All right, back to Eric. Eric spent his career in K12 IT, and he served as a IT leader at other districts too, like the Northville Public School District and Derby School District in Connecticut. And now he is the Director of Technology for Brookfield Public Schools in Connecticut. And Eric has been very busy building his skills. Also, in addition to his experience, Eric's skills and certs include CompTIA Network and Computer Technician, Novell ZenWorks, Linux, VMware, and several others. And he uses all these skills and knowledge to support the students, teachers, and staff in his districts. One recent accomplishment that Eric was able to complete, along with his busy schedule of supporting his district, is that in the summer of 2022, Eric received his master's degree in education technology from Fairfield University. Congratulations, Eric. That's a great accomplishment, and it's good to have you here today. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Carl, and I'm excited to take a couple minutes and speak to you really more about, I'm going to kind of use my district as a little bit of a case example. You can switch to the next slide, as kind of a uh, case study, if you will, and some of the experience of implementing cybersecurity measures here. The first thing that I want to share is I meant to have this put into the slide, and then I kind of passed my mind, but I wanted to piggyback off of Brett's conversation about NIST. Great resource. First of all, I absolutely completely agree with that. But there's also actually another tool that's a federal site. It's a federal resource, and it's free for school districts to sign up to. It offers a number of monitoring tools, reports, information, and that's the CISC, the Center for Internet Security. I'm going to put the link in the chat here, and it's called their MSISAC. I signed up for it as a school district. I have them monitoring our domain and web, and it's just and again, it's federally funded. There's no cost to school districts. You sign up, you get access to their workbench, and it's a great tool, and it's made a lot of conversation here in Connecticut. Many of you may have already heard about it, but like I said, I've signed up for them to monitor my public IP address. They monitor my domain, and they monitor a lot of activity. And again, I'm getting repetitive here, but I pay nothing for that. So and neither does any other school districts. So some of the things I want to talk about, budgetary impacts of implementing cybersecurity is big. We presented a budget here in Brookfield, Connecticut, that is on its way over to the town at a 6.5% increase. We know that that's going to be a tough battle in the months ahead, but it's very common in the area around Brookfield right now. Everybody's over 5%. And so, walking in and saying to your superintendent and your finance director that you need money to implement cybersecurity measures is not easy. It's very hard, and it's very easy, like many things, to say, well, we haven't had an attack. We haven't been affected. We're a small little district. Do you think they're really going to come after us? Yeah, they don't care. And you're at risk all the time. And so one of the big things is you really have to be able to explain and weed out the want versus the need. You want to do this, and this, but frankly, you need EDR solutions. You need multi-factor authentication. You need cybersecurity insurance. And so, one thing that I think we can all learn is that while budgets are tight, there's also some flexibility. And while you can't bite off more than you can chew, there's ways to make this stuff work. And unfortunately, things like E-rate and certain grants and all that haven't really caught up yet. There's a big push. I ask our E-rate consultant every single year, when is cybersecurity going to become E-rateable? E-rate put a big push into making sure that places have internet and Wi-Fi and solutions to make sure that kids can stay connected. But what about keeping safe in today's world, right? And so that's a big question too. So the funding is one of the biggest challenges. But I can tell you that a common theme you're going to see among this whole thing, and I'm going to mention it a couple times, is you can get through that part, that budgetary impact, if you get your support from above. So I'll use an example. A couple years ago, the state of Connecticut has an insurance. I don't know what other states do, but Connecticut has something called KERMA, and it's a state. Every school district signs up for it, and it's basically insurance for the school district, right? Incidental, auto, building insurance, everything insurance. They also, at no additional cost, had a cybersecurity insurance rider. So every school district in Connecticut was covered by the state's insurance at no other additional cost. Well, the meat packing plants got hacked. You heard about car systems getting hacked. the gas pipeline getting hacked. You heard about all these big cybersecurity attacks and hacks and all that stuff, and just a big fallout in cybersecurity, and then all the costs went up. And the state said, we can't do this anymore. Districts, you're on your own. So all of a sudden, we found ourselves looking for cybersecurity policies that were almost darn right impossible to get, because you had to follow certain rules. You had to have EDR solution. You had to have two-factor authentication. You had to have A, you had to have B, you had to have C, or they wouldn't even talk to you. And then when they did, your premium was $25,000 a year. Well, it's a little tough to find $25,000 when it's sprung on you after your budget's already gotten approved. So the first thing I did when we found out about this is I went into, I'm part of cabinet in my district, and that includes my superintendent, assistant superintendent, business director, and special ed director. I went right in and I said, we need this, and here's how much it could cost if you got to do your research, and here's how much it could cost if we don't have it. Here's how much, yeah, $25,000 a year is a tough pill to swallow. And if we have an incident, $10, $15, $20,000 as a deductible is hard to swallow too. But here's the horror stories of how much it costs if we don't do this. And when you have your support from above, it can do wonders. And not only do you go up and you fight for what you want and need, but they will fight with you and for you as well. And again, the reason why I'm going to continue to bring that theme up is, another thing we had to do, and I mentioned this when we were trying to get cybersecurity insurance, one of the requirements was multi-factor authentication. So I immediately went out looking for a solution to have every staff member have multi-factor authentication, both for logging into computers and Gmail, and we're working on PowerSchool and all of that other stuff. I knew that was going to be a big undertaking for multiple reasons. One, you're changing people's way of business. You're eliminating password sharing, because let's be honest, every school district, and I'd be shocked how many of my teachers admit to me that they do it, password share, because it's easier for them. And you're also basically forcing people, you're basically forcing people to use a secondary device to log in, which most of the time is their personal cell phone. So how do you deal with that? And the angst and all that. So again, there was a cost to that. So I went to my superintendent, I went to my assistant superintendent, I said, we need multi-factor authentication. It's going to cost, anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000. We went with Duo from Cisco. Great product. Can't recommend it enough. I said to my supervisor, who's the director of business, and I said, we have to do this. It has to be everybody. And here's how we have to do it. And it became a district directive, right? It's one thing for me to say it as the IT person, but when it comes from the superintendent and the business director as a directive, and you go to the Board of Ed and say, this is happening, and we try not to say too much in public, but when we say, this is happening, it weighs on a lot more, and it gains a lot more speed and traction. So community buy-in and is one of the biggest things. We said, they said, yeah, go ahead and do it. It's important, right? Then you get to the planning and communication with the staff. I couldn't roll out two-factor authentication in 2 weeks. Couldn't do it in 3 weeks. Heck, it took me almost 6 months. You have to configure it. You have to test it. Then you have to communicate it. Then you have to provide training and support and instruction, and then you have to deal with the thousands of questions, right? And then you have to work through it. And transparency, honesty is all a big deal, right? So, we had a number of questions come through. Well, if I use my phone for this, I'm using my personal phone. None of it came up to that they were using it for work, but you're going to know information. You're going to track my data. You're going to see what's in my phone. And we had to simply explain, and we even showed them, no, the most we have is your cell phone number, which we don't share, and whether you use an iPhone or an Android phone, and whether or not you have the Duo app installed on your phone. That's all we see. And so we have to explain that to them. We offered key fobs, the little fobs that have the 6-digit code that change every 30 seconds to 1 minute. For the people who are really adamant about not using their cell phone, or the rare people who still pay for text messages, which does happen, or don't have, good data plans, they took them and used them. We actually had a number of people who refused to use their phone, took the fob, and a couple months later gave us back the fob and said, my phone's way easier, to just tap the button to say go. So we had to deal with that. And then ultimately, a lot of our other questions were answered by, we have to do this for cybersecurity insurance. And, most people aren't blind to what was going on in the news. They were hearing about the hacks. They were hearing about local school districts that had the issue. And so common sense tended to prevail there as well. But when you have it as a district directive, and then you say to people, we have a gigantic exposure if we don't do this, that could have waves of disruption and all of that, is a big deal. So yeah, you have to understand that there's going to take time. I signed on for Duo in January of 2022. We didn't implement until the start of the next school year, when I had to do trainings at the beginning of the year and basically walk most of our staff members through configuring, signing on, getting them to understand and feel comfortable with it. Do I still get a sly comment every now and then? Yeah, I do. Like, I can't believe you did this. It's mostly jokingly, but most people understand that there's a significant reason to it, and the reason why they understand is because we explained it and we walked them through it. We didn't just say this is happening because it has to happen. So that definitely takes some time. And that's, again, where time constraints in implementation and training. We all know our teachers, us as tech people, our paras, our staff, we have schedules all over the place. Only X number of days that this group can work, X number of days that this group can work. If it's after this time, they're out of contract and they don't have to stay. What time of the year are we going to do this at? We also have to do training on teacher evaluation, and we also have to do training on Common Core standards, and we also have to do, so when do you find that time? And it's a really, really delicate balance. And the same thing comes with, and also, when you start talking about training, and then also my other point here, teaching users to understand cybersecurity needs. You look at programs like KnowBe4, some of us probably use with security, awareness and phishing scams and stuff like that. How do you enforce? There, our policies say that you have to, maintain a safe networking environment, data privacy and things say that we have to report incidents and cases and so long. But if we have a teacher, give into one of our KnowBe4 phishing schemes, and it says that you have to take this training, and they come back and say, no, I don't. There's no requirement of my job that I do it. How do we do that too? And again, so that's my next step personally, is where do I address that next? So the human factor is certainly the most challenging part. We hear about this all the time, right? Your biggest risk in IT is your end user. And the same thing goes with implementing cybersecurity measures. And believe me, they're always going to try to find a workaround. I'll use one more example and then I'll wrap up. And you got to stay on top of this stuff. So we had 2 secretaries in one of our schools. They both asked for a key fob instead of using their phones. And we drilled down a little bit deeper to find out why they wanted the key fob. Well, it turns out each one of them left that key fob in their desk so that when one was out, the other one could use that key fob to log in as that person to access stuff that they needed. So we denied them the key fobs because, they were always trying to find a workaround. Because you can explain things like we need cybersecurity protection and we need this till they're blue in the face. But if it's if it's something, if they can find a way to make some people, right, if they can find a way to make that job a little bit easier or find a workaround to skip around, they're going to find it and not necessarily realize and think about the risk that they're putting on. Will something go awry because of that? Probably not, but I don't want to say that. I'm going to assume that everything is an incident, and everything puts us at risk. I still don't sleep at night sometimes, but that's the job we're in. So I hope this was informational, and I definitely wanted to share some cases of some of the work that we've had to do and continue, and frankly continue to do. It never ends.
Eric, that was fantastic. Love your stories. Those are great examples from your school district about challenges that you're able to overcome, but it's constant vigilance. Like you said, IT folks don't normally get to sleep at night, but I think one thing that you did point out that is very important is the top-down buy-in for what you're doing. A lot of times IT folks are alone in moving these initiatives forward because they totally understand it. They totally understand the risk, and they have heard horror stories from other districts, and they're trying to prevent anything from happening to their district. And as you said, they're watching the news and see that even Target or a pharmaceutical company has a breach. And so it doesn't matter how big or small you are susceptible and you have risk. So it just makes sense to adhere to some of the practices and ideas that you brought up and that Brett brought up to at least have some fundamental IT security or cybersecurity plan for your district. And it's very easy to do that. And I appreciate you sharing everything from your experiences. I can tell you to all the districts that are attending that Campus Consortium Foundation can help you. And we do a lot of free work, in terms of supporting you, getting you a basic IT security plan, helping you champion into the superintendents. We work with superintendents too, though, so we can work with presentations or to boards or to government agencies. So we have been able to champion and help many districts acquire at least the basics. And then we also have connections to technology organizations that support K12 that are nonprofit, as well as vendors that can provide the services. So you can really craft something for your district between advising that we can provide you to create a plan, disaster recovery, incident response, and also a combination of services that are monitoring your network. And right there, you've got at least the basics started. I think there was a lot of value in the discussion about single sign-on, as Brett had mentioned, very valuable because it really channels everybody a certain way, and it really increases the protection for them and for everyone else. And also the multi-factor authentication, as Eric brought up, very important. And it is frustrating. It's frustrating for a lot of users. They look for shortcuts, but there are ways to make it easy and usable. And as I heard today from our panelists, you can have all the security controls in place, but if nobody's using them, then that is not going to help your district. And there is innovation out there. There are companies that are providing much more user-friendly MFA than there have been. And they don't always involve using separate devices or fobs. And we are heading to better authentication. We know the password is very old-fashioned, so there's got to be newer ways to sign into your accounts. Password management is just not sustainable for most folks. And so there are several companies that are partners with Campus Consortium that we can help you work with them or introduce a new technology. Often they will launch it in your environment at no charge if you want to try it out. and we can work with you as a liaison for these vendors, as well as provide you services and support for K12 specifically for any of these initiatives. So I really want to thank Eric and Brett for joining us today, and I want to thank their school districts for allowing us to hear about their stories. One more poll question, please, attendees. Before you leave, does your institution provide adequate support for IT projects, support, operations, and customer service? And this kind of goes to what Brett and Eric were talking about in terms of they can't do it all themselves, but it's that right mix. And the legacy method of supporting IT and IT security and education no longer works. You can't run everything yourself. And with the dependency on technology increasing every day for K-12 and higher education, IT leaders really need to balance their portfolio of support so they can be most effective in leading their institutions and to protect and support the rest of the organization. And it looks like, well, yes and no, 50-50. So very good. Thank you, attendees, everybody, for joining in and participating, for answering all these poll questions. I want to thank Brett and Eric so much for sharing their stories, their thought leadership, and their expertise and experiences. And I want to thank Jennifer Brown, our membership coordinator at Campus Consortium Foundation, who is responsible for the whole back end of this and putting it together, and the rest of the Campus Consortium team. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. Please let us know if we can help you in any way. We're here for you. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.